The afternoon sun beat down on the cracked pavement as Leilani checked her phone for the 10th time in 5 minutes. The bus was late. Again. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other, her worn sneakers squeaking slightly against the concrete. In her hands, she clutched a small backpack that held everything she needed for the trip. A change of clothes, her grandmother's favorite plumeria flowers wrapped carefully in damp paper towels, and the printed boarding pass that represented 6 months of saving every extra dollar. Her shift at the beachside cafe had run longer than expected. Old Mrs. Chen had come in right before closing, and Leilani couldn't bring herself to rush the elderly woman through her usual cup of tea and slice of hopia pie. Mrs. Chen reminded her too much of her own grandmother. But that kindness had cost her precious minutes, and now she stood at the bus stop, watching the minutes tick away on her phone screen like sand through an hourglass. Leilani had been working at 3 different restaurants since she turned 21. The morning shift started at 5:30 at a hotel buffet in Waikiki, where tourists loaded their plates with fresh pineapple and macadamia nut pancakes, while she refilled coffee cups and cleared tables. Her afternoon job was at the beachside cafe, where she served acai bowls and poked to sunburned visitors. 3 nights a week, she worked the dinner shift at a family-owned restaurant in Chinatown, where the kitchen heat made her uniform stick to her back and the smell of garlic and ginger followed her home. It wasn't the life she'd imagined when she was younger. Back then, she'd dreamed of becoming a teacher, of having her own classroom where kids could learn and grow. She'd picture herself reading stories to wide-eyed children, helping them discover that learning could be an adventure. But dreams had a way of changing when reality stepped in. When her parents died in a car accident 3 years ago, everything shifted. Suddenly, she wasn't just responsible for herself anymore. Her 2 younger siblings, Daniel and Keiko, needed someone to take care of them, someone to make sure they had food on the table, clothes that fit, and a roof over their heads. At first, relatives had offered to help. Aunts and uncles spoke in hushed tones about what's best for the children and splitting them up temporarily. But Leilani had stood firm. They were a family, and families stayed together. She'd dropped out of community college in her 2nd semester and picked up extra shifts wherever she could find them. The modest life insurance payout from her parents' accident covered the first year's rent on their tiny 2-bedroom apartment. But after that, everything fell on her shoulders. The bus still hadn't come. Leilani glanced down the street, shielding her eyes from the sun. Nothing but heat waves shimmering off the asphalt and the usual flow of tourist traffic heading toward the beaches. Her flight was in less than 2 hours. The airport was at least 30 minutes away, maybe 40 with traffic. She needed to check in, get through security, find her gate. Her chest tightened with each passing second. Her phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "Did you make the bus? Tell Grandma we love her." The words made her eyes sting. Her grandmother, her father's mother, was the one who'd stepped up the most after the accident. Even though she lived in Sacramento and was dealing with her own health problems, she'd called every week, sent money when she could, and always reminded Leilani that she was doing an amazing job. "You're stronger than you know," Grandma Rose would say in her warm, scratchy voice. Your parents would be so proud. And now Grandma Rose was gone too. The call had come 4 days ago, early in the morning. Heart attack, quick and painless, the doctor said, as if that made it easier. Leilani had stood in the middle of their cramped kitchen, phone pressed to her ear, listening to her uncle's voice crack as he delivered the news. She'd sunk to the floor right there, between the refrigerator and the rickety dining table, and cried for the first time since her parents' funeral. The plane ticket had taken every bit of her emergency savings. She'd been setting aside money for months, hoping to eventually go back to school, maybe take just 1 class to start. But family came first. It always did. Her boss at the hotel had been understanding, giving her 3 days off without pay. The cafe manager hadn't been as kind, warning her that missing shifts might mean losing her spot on the schedule. But Leilani didn't care. Some things mattered more than money. Saying goodbye to Grandma Rose was one of them. A car horn blared somewhere in the distance. Leilani checked her phone again. The bus tracker app showed her bus still 7 minutes away, but she'd watched that same estimate for the past 15 minutes. Her stomach churned. She thought about calling a taxi, but the fare to the airport would cost almost as much as her plane ticket. She'd already borrowed money from her friend Kiana to cover the baggage fee. There was nothing left to spare. Tourists walked past, laughing and taking selfies with their expensive cameras. A family strolled by, the kids licking rainbow-colored shave ice while their parents debated which beach to visit next. Leilani felt a familiar pang in her chest. She didn't resent them exactly, but sometimes the contrast between their carefree vacation life and her own constant struggle felt overwhelming. They probably didn't think twice about the cost of a taxi or a missed bus. For them, inconveniences were just minor bumps in an otherwise perfect trip. She'd grown up in Hawaii, born and raised on this island that people paid thousands of dollars to visit for a week. But the Hawaii she knew wasn't the one on the postcards. It was expensive grocery stores where a gallon of milk cost almost twice what it did on the mainland. It was working 3 jobs and still barely making rent. It was watching friends leave for college and never come back, because there weren't enough good jobs to support them here. Paradise had a price, and locals like her paid it every single day. The sun was starting to shift lower in the sky, painting everything in shades of gold and orange. Beautiful, like always. Leilani had stopped noticing the beauty most days. When you were tired down to your bones, when every minute was accounted for between work and taking care of your family, sunsets became just another marker of time passing. Another day survived. Another night of too little sleep before starting all over again. Her phone showed 52 minutes until boarding. Leilani felt tears building behind her eyes, hot and insistent. She couldn't miss this flight. She couldn't let Grandma Rose down one last time. All those phone calls where she'd promised to visit soon, all those times she'd said maybe next month or when things calmed down at work. Now there would be no more chances. The last conversation they'd had, Grandma Rose had asked about her dreams. "Are you still thinking about teaching, sweetheart?" she'd asked. Leilani had changed the subject, made some excuse about being too busy. The truth was, she'd stopped letting herself think about it. Dreams hurt too much when they felt impossible. A movement down the street caught her attention. For a hopeful second, she thought it might be the bus. But it was just another car. A sleek black SUV with tinted windows, the kind that screamed money. It slowed down as it approached, and Leilani instinctively stepped back from the curb. You learn to be careful, especially as a young woman alone. The vehicle pulled up beside the bus stop, and the passenger window rolled down smoothly. The driver was an older man, probably in his 60s, with silver hair and weathered skin that spoke of time spent outdoors. He wore a simple polo shirt, light blue, nothing fancy despite the expensive car he drove. But it was his eyes that struck her, kind eyes, the sort that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. He looked concerned. "Excuse me, miss," he said, and his voice carried a soft drawl that definitely wasn't local. "I don't mean to intrude, but are you all right? You look like you might be in some kind of trouble." Leilani's first instinct was to say she was fine. That's what you did. You kept your problems to yourself, and you certainly didn't share them with strangers in expensive cars. But something about his genuine concern, and maybe the desperation of her situation, made the words tumble out before she could stop them. "I'm waiting for the bus to the airport," she said, her voice shakier than she'd intended. "My flight leaves in less than an hour, and the bus should have been here 20 minutes ago. I need to get to Sacramento. My grandmother," her voice cracked. "She passed away, and the funeral is tomorrow." The man's expression softened with sympathy. He glanced at the empty road behind him, then back at her. "I'm so sorry for your loss," he said, and something in his tone made it clear he meant it. These weren't just polite words. "How far is the airport from here?" "About 30 minutes, Leilani said. "Maybe more with traffic." The man nodded slowly, seeming to consider something. Then he did something that completely surprised her. He put his car in park right there at the bus stop and stepped out. He was tall, with the kind of presence that came from confidence rather than arrogance. His clothes might have been simple, but everything about him suggested success. The way he carried himself, the quality of his watch, the easy calm in his manner. "My name is Robert Crawford," he said, extending his hand. "I'm visiting from Texas, and I think I can help you make that flight." Leilani hesitated, all the warnings about stranger danger flashing through her mind. But Robert seemed to understand her caution. He pulled out his wallet and showed her his driver's license, a business card from what looked like an oil company, and even a photo of what appeared to be his grandchildren. "I know how this looks," he said with a gentle smile. "Strange man offering a ride to a young woman he doesn't know." But I promise you, I'm just someone who remembers what it's like to miss important moments because of bad luck and bad timing. I'm heading in that direction anyway, and I'd be honored to help you get to your grandmother's funeral." Something in Leilani's gut told her to trust him. Maybe it was desperation, or maybe it was the genuine kindness in his eyes that reminded her of her own grandfather. Either way, she found herself nodding. "Okay," she said quietly. "Thank you." "I'm Leilani." "Well, Leilani," Robert said, opening the passenger door for her. "Let's get you to that airport." As she slid into the soft leather seat, Leilani had no idea that this moment, this chance encounter at a dusty bus stop, would change her life in ways she couldn't possibly imagine. All she knew was that a stranger had stopped when he didn't have to, had offered help when he could have easily driven past. In a world that often felt cold and indifferent, that small act of kindness felt like a miracle. The SUV pulled away from the curb, leaving the empty bus stop behind. 3 minutes later, the bus finally arrived, its brakes hissing as it stopped at the vacant shelter. The driver waited a moment, then pulled back into traffic, completely unaware of the story that had just begun to unfold. The air conditioning in Robert's SUV was a welcome relief from the sticky heat outside. Leilani settled into the passenger seat, still half convinced this was some kind of dream. The leather was softer than anything she'd ever sat on, and the car glided so smoothly over the road that she barely felt the bumps and potholes that usually rattled the old bus. Robert merged into traffic with practiced ease, his hands relaxed on the steering wheel. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. Leilani clutched her backpack on her lap, her fingers tracing the frayed edges of the straps. She snuck a glance at her unexpected driver. He had the kind of face that had seen a lot of life, lines around his eyes and mouth that came from both smiling and worrying. There was something grandfatherly about him, something that made her feel a little less nervous about being in a stranger's car. "So you're from here?" Robert asked, breaking the silence. His tone was conversational, easy, like they were old friends catching up rather than two people who'd met 5 minutes ago. "Born and raised," Leilani said. "Lived here my whole life. Never even been to the mainland until—" She paused, the reality hitting her again. "Until now, I guess." Robert glanced over at her, surprise evident on his face. "Really? This is your first time leaving the islands?" Leilani nodded, feeling a little embarrassed. Most people she knew had at least visited relatives somewhere on the mainland, had taken trips to Vegas or California. But travel cost money, and money was something her family had never had much of even before her parents died. "Well," Robert said thoughtfully, "I wish it were under better circumstances, but your grandmother, she must have been very special to you." The kindness in his voice made Leilani's throat tighten. "She was," she managed to say. "After my parents passed away 3 years ago, she was the one who kept calling, kept checking on us. She lived in Sacramento, so she couldn't be here physically, but she never let us feel alone. She'd send cards for every little occasion, call just to hear our voices, tell us stories about my dad when he was young." "Us?" Robert asked gently. "Me and my younger brother and sister. Daniel's 17 and Keiko just turned 15. I've been taking care of them since the accident." The words came out matter of fact, but saying them always made her feel the weight of responsibility settle back on her shoulders. Robert was quiet for a moment, processing this information. They were cruising along the highway now, palm trees whipping past the windows, the ocean visible in brief flashes between buildings. "That's quite a responsibility for someone your age," he finally said. "How old are you, if you don't mind me asking?" 22, Leilani said. "I'll be 23 next month." 22, Robert repeated, shaking his head slightly. "When I was 22, I was barely responsible enough to take care of myself, let alone 2 teenagers. That takes real strength." Leilani felt heat rise to her cheeks. She wasn't used to compliments, especially not about her situation. Most people either pitied her or avoided the topic altogether. "I just do what I have to do," she said. "They're my family." "Still," Robert said, "not everyone would step up like that. A lot of people would have looked for the easier path. You chose the harder one because it was right. That says something about your character." They fell into a comfortable rhythm of conversation. Robert asked about her siblings, and Leilani found herself talking more freely than she expected. She told him about Daniel's passion for computer programming, how he stayed up late teaching himself to code from free online tutorials, She described Keiko's talent for drawing, how their tiny apartment was covered in sketches of flowers and ocean scenes. She even mentioned how hard it was sometimes being more like a parent than a sister, having to be the one who set rules and enforced curfews when she was barely an adult herself. Robert listened without interrupting, nodding at the right moments, his expression thoughtful. There was something about him that made talking easy. Maybe it was because he was a stranger and she'd never see him again, or maybe it was just that she'd been holding everything inside for so long that having someone actually interested in her story felt like opening a pressure valve. "What about you?" Robert asked as they approached a particularly crowded section of highway. "What were you doing before all this happened? Did you have plans, dreams?" Leilani looked out the window, watching a plane take off in the distance. "I wanted to be a teacher," she said softly. "I was in community college, studying education. I loved it. I'd volunteer at the elementary school near our apartment, help kids with reading. There was this one boy barely spoke English, and watching him start to understand, seeing his face light up when he finally got it." She smiled at the memory. "That's what I wanted to do with my life." "Wanted?" Robert picked up on the past tense. "You don't want that anymore?" "It's not about wanting," Leilani said. "It's about what's possible. Between 3 jobs and taking care of Daniel and Keiko, there's no time for school. And even if there was time, there's definitely no money. Community college might be cheaper than university, but it's still expensive when you're trying to keep 3 people fed and housed in Hawaii." Robert didn't respond right away. Leilani worried she'd overshared, dumped too much of her life story on this kind stranger who was just trying to help her catch a flight. But when she glanced over, his expression wasn't uncomfortable or dismissive. He looked thoughtful, almost sad. "You know," he said after a moment, "I grew up poor, real poor, the kind where you wear shoes with holes in them because new ones aren't in the budget. My daddy worked in the oil fields, dangerous work that barely paid enough to keep us going. My mama took in laundry and ironing from wealthier families in town." He smiled, but it was tinged with old pain. "I remember being embarrassed when my friends' mothers would drop off their fancy clothes at our house. Didn't want anyone to know my mama was the washerwoman." Leilani found herself drawn into his story, forgetting for a moment her own worries about the flight. "I was determined to get out," Robert continued. "Worked odd jobs from the time I was 12. Saved every penny I could. When I was 18, I had enough money saved to buy a bus ticket to Dallas. There was a job opening at an oil company, entry-level stuff, but it was a foot in the door, the night before I was supposed to leave." He paused, his hands tightening slightly on the wheel. "My little brother got sick. Really sick. Turned out to be appendicitis. The surgery and hospital stay wiped out every cent we had, and then some." "Did you miss your chance?" Leilani asked, completely absorbed in his story now. "Almost," Robert said. "I was standing outside the bus station with no ticket and no money, watching my dream literally drive away. But this businessman, guy in a nice suit, he'd been watching me. Came over and asked what was wrong. I told him, and you know what he did? He bought me a ticket, just like that. Handed it to me and said, 'Go make something of yourself, son.' Then he walked away. I never even got his name." Leilani felt goosebumps rise on her arms despite the cool air in the car. "That job changed my life," Robert said. "Started at the bottom, worked my way up. Took night classes, learned the business inside and out. Eventually started my own company. Did well for myself." He said it simply, without bragging, just stating facts. "But I never forgot that man. Never forgot what it felt like to have someone believe in me when I had no reason to believe in myself." "Is that why you stopped for me?" Leilani asked quietly. Robert smiled. "Partly. But also because you looked like someone who deserved a break. Someone who'd been carrying the world on her shoulders for too long." They were getting close to the airport now. Leilani could see the control tower in the distance. Planes lined up on the tarmac like patient birds. Her anxiety about making her flight started creeping back in. She checked her phone, 38 minutes until boarding. They might actually make it. "Tell me more about your grandmother," Robert said, perhaps sensing her rising stress. "What kind of person was she?" Leilani smiled, grateful for the distraction. "She was tough. Really tough. She'd grown up during hard times. Raised 5 kids, mostly on her own when my grandfather was working construction jobs all over California. But she was also the softest person I knew. She made the best apple pie. Used to mail us one every Thanksgiving, packed so carefully it would arrive perfectly intact. She'd write these long letters, actual handwritten letters, telling us stories about the family, about my dad when he was young and getting into trouble. Sounds like she was a writer, Robert observed. She was, actually. Never published or anything, but she had notebooks full of stories, family histories, memories, little observations about life. She always said writing was how she made sense of the world. Leilani's voice grew thick with emotion. The last time we talked, she told me she was writing everything down for us. All the family stories, all the recipes, all the things she wanted us to know. She said she was almost finished. Did she finish it? Robert asked gently. I don't know, Leilani said. I hope so. My uncle is the one who called me about her passing. We're not super close. He and my dad didn't really get along, so I don't know what's happening with her things yet. The funeral is tomorrow, and then I guess we'll figure out the rest. Robert pulled up to the departure area, joining the line of cars dropping off passengers. The airport buzzed with activity. People hauling suitcases, families saying goodbye, harried travelers checking their phones. It all felt surreal to Leilani. An hour ago, she'd been standing at a bus stop, watching her chances of making this trip disappear. Now here she was, thanks to a stranger's kindness. Thank you, she said, turning to Robert. The words felt inadequate for what he'd done. Really, thank you so much. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't stopped. It was my pleasure, Robert said, putting the car in park. Come on, let me help you get checked in. Oh, you don't have to. Leilani started, but Robert was already getting out of the car. They walked into the terminal together, Robert carrying himself with the easy confidence of someone who'd spent a lifetime in airports. The check-in area was crowded, lines snaking back from every counter. Leilani's heart sank. She'd never make it through in time. But Robert guided her to the business class line, which was significantly shorter. I fly this airline all the time, he explained. They know me. It'll be faster. When they reached the counter, the agent, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a tired smile, greeted Robert by name. Mr. Crawford. Good to see you again. Are you flying out today? Not me, but my young friend here is, Robert said, gesturing to Leilani. She's got a flight in about 30 minutes. Leilani fumbled in her backpack for her boarding pass and ID, her hands shaking slightly from nerves. She handed them to the agent, who scanned the documents and began typing on her computer. Then her expression changed. The smile faded, replaced by concern. Oh dear, the agent said, looking from her screen to Leilani and back again. I'm so sorry, but there's been a problem with your reservation. Leilani's stomach dropped. What kind of problem? It looks like there was a system error. Your ticket was canceled. I'm not sure how this happened. It shouldn't have. But your seat has been released and the flight is completely full. But I paid for it, Leilani said, her voice rising with panic. I have the confirmation email, the boarding pass. I know, and I'm truly sorry, the agent said, her tone genuinely apologetic. This is our error, absolutely. We can rebook you on the next available flight, but that's not until tomorrow afternoon, and the price difference would be… She glanced at her screen and winced. It would be about $900. Leilani felt the world tilt. $900. She didn't have $90, let alone $900. The funeral was tomorrow morning. A flight tomorrow afternoon would be too late. She'd miss everything, the service, the burial, her last chance to say goodbye. All because of some computer error that wasn't even her fault. Tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them. She pressed her hand to her mouth, trying to hold back the sob building in her chest. This couldn't be happening. It just couldn't. Let me see what I can do, the agent said quickly, typing frantically. Maybe I can find something. Put her on the next flight out, Robert said quietly but firmly. Business class. I'll cover the cost. Both Leilani and the agent looked at him in shock. Mr. Crawford, that's very generous, but… The agent started. No buts, Robert said, pulling out his credit card and placing it on the counter. This young woman needs to get to her grandmother's funeral, and she's going to get there. Whatever it costs, put it on this card. Robert, no, Leilani said, finding her voice through her tears. I can't let you do that. You've already done so much. He turned to her, and the look in his eyes was so kind, so sincere that it stopped her protests. Leilani, let me do this, please. You need to be with your family right now. That's more important than money. But I can't pay you back, she whispered. Not anytime soon. Maybe not ever. I'm not asking you to, Robert said simply. This is a gift. One person helping another. No strings attached. The same way someone once helped me. The agent was already typing, her fingers flying over the keyboard. "Okay, I can get you on the next flight, which leaves in 45 minutes. Business class window seat. Mr. Crawford, if you'll just sign here." As Robert signed the receipt and the agent printed out a new boarding pass, Leilani stood there in a daze. This didn't feel real. People didn't just do things like this, especially not for strangers. But here was this man, this person she'd met less than an hour ago, spending what had to be thousands of dollars to help her get to a funeral for a grandmother he'd never met. The agent handed Leilani her new boarding pass with a warm smile. "You're all set. Gate B7 and they're already boarding. You'd better hurry." Leilani took the boarding pass with trembling hands, then turned to Robert. She didn't know what to say. Thank you seemed too small, too inadequate for what he'd done. "Go," Robert said gently, reading her expression. "Your grandmother is waiting." "And Leilani?" He pulled a business card from his wallet and pressed it into her hand. "When you get back, when things settle down, send me an email. Let me know you made it okay. I'd like to know how you're doing." Leilani nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She hugged him quickly, fiercely, then grabbed her backpack and ran toward security, clutching the boarding pass like a lifeline. As she joined the security line, she turned back one more time. Robert was still standing there, watching to make sure she got through okay. He raised his hand in a small wave and she waved back, her vision blurry with grateful tears. She had no idea then that this was just the beginning, that Robert Crawford's kindness would extend far beyond a ride to the airport and a plane ticket. All she knew in that moment was that a stranger had seen her when she needed help most and he hadn't looked away. In a world that often felt cold and indifferent, that meant everything. The funeral had been beautiful in the way that sad things sometimes are. Grandma Rose's church in Sacramento was filled with flowers and people who loved her. Leilani had stood at the front with her uncle and his family, listening to stories about her grandmother that she'd never heard before. A neighbor talked about how Grandma Rose had taught her to bake bread during the loneliest year of her life. A woman from the church book club described how Grandma Rose always brought homemade cookies and remembered everyone's favorite flavors. Each story painted a picture of a woman who'd made kindness her life's work in small, quiet ways. Leilani had cried through most of it. Not just tears of grief, but something more complicated. She cried for the loss, yes, but also for all the visits that never happened. All the phone calls she'd cut short because she was too tired or too busy. She cried because her siblings couldn't afford to come with her, couldn't say their own goodbyes. And somewhere in the mix, she cried tears of gratitude for Robert Crawford, the stranger who'd made sure she could be here at all. After the service, her Uncle Richard had pulled her aside. He was her father's older brother, a man who'd always seemed uncomfortable around kids. He and her dad had never been close, some old argument from years ago that nobody talked about. Richard had his own family, 2 grown sons who barely acknowledged Leilani's existence, and a wife who smiled politely but kept her distance. "Your grandmother left some things," Richard had said, his tone businesslike. "Papers, photo albums, her jewelry, some furniture. I'll be handling the estate such as it is. There's not much of value, but I'll make sure you get what's rightfully yours." The way he said it made Leilani feel like she was being tolerated rather than welcomed. She'd thanked him quietly and left as soon as was polite, catching a late flight back to Hawaii that same night. She couldn't afford another day off work, and truthfully, she didn't want to spend more time feeling like an outsider in what was left of her father's family. The flight home had given her too much time to think. She sat in her business class seat, still amazed by the extra legroom, the real meal on actual plates, and thought about everything Robert had done for her. She'd pulled out his business card multiple times during the trip, reading the simple text: Robert Crawford, Crawford Energy Solutions, a Houston address, an email, a phone number. She'd wanted to call him right away to thank him again, but what could she possibly say that would be enough? Now 3 weeks after returning home, Leilani had fallen back into her old routine. Early morning shift at the hotel, afternoon at the cafe, evening shifts at the restaurant when they needed her. Daniel and Keiko had been relieved to have her back, though they'd tried to act like they'd managed fine without her. The apartment was messier than when she'd left, and the refrigerator was nearly empty, but they'd survived. That was what mattered. She'd tried several times to write an email to Robert. She'd type out a few sentences, then delete them. Dear Mr. Crawford felt too formal. Hey Robert felt too casual. How did you thank someone for changing your life? She'd draft paragraph after paragraph trying to express what his kindness had meant. But everything she wrote felt inadequate, so the emails remained unsent, sitting in her drafts folder like good intentions that never quite materialized. It was a Tuesday morning, her day off from the hotel, when everything changed. Leilani was home alone, Daniel and Keiko at school enjoying the rare quiet of an empty apartment. She was halfway through her second cup of coffee, still in her pajamas, when someone knocked on the door. She wasn't expecting anyone. The mailman usually just left packages outside, and her friends knew to text before showing up. She looked through the peephole and saw a man in a uniform, holding a tablet and a large envelope. FedEx, probably. Something for their neighbor being delivered to the wrong apartment again. She opened the door. "Leilani Kahali?" the delivery man asked, checking his tablet. "That's me," she said, surprised. "I need a signature for this." He handed her the tablet and the envelope. It was a thick FedEx priority envelope, the kind businesses used for important documents. The return address made her breath catch. Crawford Energy Solutions, Houston, Texas. Her hands shook slightly as she signed for it. The delivery man left, and she stood in the doorway holding the envelope like it might explode. Robert had sent her something. But what and why? They'd never even exchanged emails. How did he even know her address? She closed the door and sat on their worn couch, staring at the envelope for a full minute before working up the courage to open it. Inside she found two things: a handwritten letter on heavy, cream-colored paper, and a sealed white envelope that felt suspiciously like it might contain a check. Her heart pounding, Leilani unfolded the letter. The handwriting was neat and precise, the kind that came from a generation that had learned penmanship in school. "Dear Leilani," it began. Just seeing her name in his handwriting made her eyes water. "I hope this letter finds you well, and I hope that your grandmother's service brought you some peace. I've been thinking about our conversation in the car that day, and about the young woman I met who was carrying so much weight on her shoulders with such grace and dignity. You probably wonder how I found your address. I hope you don't mind, but I asked the airline to help me locate you. I explained that I'd helped you catch your flight and wanted to follow up to make sure you'd made it home safely. They were kind enough to provide your contact information. I've been thinking a lot about something you said during our drive. You told me about your dream of becoming a teacher, and how it felt impossible now given your circumstances. That stayed with me, Leilani. It's haunted me, actually, in the best possible way. 30 years ago, a stranger helped me catch a bus that changed my life. I never got to thank him, never got to tell him what that simple act of kindness meant. I built a successful business, raised a family, and achieved things I never thought possible for a poor kid from a small Texas town. But I've never forgotten that moment, and I've never forgotten the debt I owe to that stranger's generosity. I've spent years looking for ways to pay it forward. I've donated to charities, established scholarships, helped young entrepreneurs get started, but none of it ever felt quite right. It was good work, but it felt impersonal. Distant, I was helping people, but I wasn't connecting with them, wasn't seeing the impact of my actions the way that stranger must have seen the impact of his. Then I met you, a young woman who'd sacrificed her own dreams to take care of her family, who worked 3 jobs and still found it in herself to be kind, to care about others. You reminded me of myself at that age, determined, resilient, but struggling against circumstances beyond your control, and I realized that this was my chance to be for you what that stranger was for me. In the envelope with this letter, you'll find a check. It's a substantial amount, $50,000. Before you panic or think there's been a mistake, let me explain. This money is for your education. It's to help you pursue that dream of becoming a teacher that you've had to put on hold. It's to take some of the pressure off so you can breathe, so you can imagine a future beyond just surviving day to day. I know what you're thinking. That's too much. That you can't accept it. That you don't deserve it. But here's the truth, Leilani. You do deserve it. Not because of anything you did or didn't do, but because everyone deserves a chance to pursue their dreams. Everyone deserves to have someone believe in them. There's only one condition to this gift, and it's not for me. It's for you. Someday when you're able, I want you to help someone else. It doesn't have to be financially. It could be tutoring a struggling student, mentoring someone going through hard times, or just stopping to help someone who's missed their bus. Whatever form it takes, I want you to pass this kindness forward. Your grandmother sounds like she was a remarkable woman who understood that the best legacy we can leave is the impact we have on others' lives. I think she'd be proud of you for accepting this help and using it to build a better future for yourself and your siblings. Please don't try to pay me back. This isn't a loan. It's a gift freely given because I believe in you and what you can become. Use it wisely, use it well, and know that somewhere in Texas there's an old man who'll be rooting for you every step of the way. If you're comfortable with it, I'd love to hear from you from time to time. I gave you my business card and that email address reaches me directly. I'd be honored to hear about your journey, to offer advice if you ever need it, or just to know how you and your siblings are doing. Life has a funny way of bringing people together at exactly the right moment. I don't believe in coincidences, Leilani. I think we were meant to meet that day. You needed help catching a plane, but maybe I needed something too. Maybe I needed to remember what it feels like to make a real difference in someone's life. To see the person, not just the problem. Thank you for trusting me that day. Thank you for sharing your story. And thank you for giving an old businessman the chance to finally pay forward a debt that's been weighing on his heart for 30 years. With warmest regards and highest hopes for your future, Robert Crawford. Leilani sat frozen on the couch, the letter trembling in her hands. She read it again. Then a third time. The words didn't change. $50,000. For her education. No strings attached except to someday help someone else. With shaking hands, she opened the second envelope. Inside was a check, made out to her name with more zeros than she'd ever seen on a piece of paper meant for her. $50,000. She stared at it until the numbers blurred through her tears. This wasn't possible. People didn't just do things like this. Strangers didn't give away life-changing amounts of money to someone they'd spent less than an hour with. But the check was real. The letter was real. The kindness behind it was undeniably, impossibly real. Leilani started to cry, not the quiet, controlled tears she'd become so good at hiding, but deep, body-shaking sobs that seemed to come from somewhere she'd kept locked away for years. She cried for the weight she'd been carrying, for the dreams she'd thought were dead, for the unexpected miracle of Robert Crawford's generosity. She cried because someone had seen her, really seen her, and thought she was worth investing in. She didn't know how long she sat there, clutching the letter and check, crying tears of shock and relief and overwhelming gratitude. When she finally calmed down enough to think clearly, her first instinct was to call Robert, to thank him, to tell him she couldn't possibly accept this, to ask if he was sure, if this was real, if he understood what this meant. But as she picked up her phone, she realized something. Robert knew exactly what this meant. That's why he'd done it. And calling to refuse or to question his generosity would be like telling him his gift didn't matter, that his faith in her was misplaced. Instead, she needed to prove him right. She needed to show him that his belief in her wasn't wasted. She needed to become the teacher she'd always dreamed of being, not just for herself, but for all the kids who would one day sit in her classroom, for Daniel and Keiko, who needed to see that dreams were possible, for Grandma Rose, who'd always believed in her, and for Robert, who'd given her a second chance at the future she'd thought was lost forever. Leilani carefully folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope with the check. She walked to her tiny bedroom and opened the bottom drawer of her dresser, where she kept the few precious things she owned. Her parents' wedding rings, a photo album from better times, the last birthday card Grandma Rose had sent her. She placed Robert's letter and check inside, then closed the drawer gently. Tomorrow, she'd go to the bank. She'd make sure the check was real, that this wasn't some elaborate mistake or misunderstanding. She'd start researching schools and programs, figuring out how to balance education with taking care of her siblings. She'd write Robert the email she'd been trying to compose for weeks, finding the words to thank him properly. But today, right now, she just needed to sit with this feeling, this strange, wonderful, terrifying feeling of hope. It had been so long since she'd felt it that she'd almost forgotten what it was like. Hope that life could be different. Hope that dreams could come true. Hope that kindness existed in the world in bigger ways than she'd imagined. Her phone buzzed with a text from Keiko. Can we have tacos for dinner? Just a normal question on a normal day, except today wasn't normal at all. Today everything had changed. Leilani smiled through her tears and texted back. Yes, and tonight I have something amazing to tell you guys. Something that's going to change all our lives. She looked around their cramped apartment, the peeling paint, the second-hand furniture, the kitchen where the cabinet door didn't quite close right. It didn't look any different than it had an hour ago, but somehow it felt different. It felt like the beginning of something new, like the first page of a story that was just starting to be written. And somewhere in Texas, Robert Crawford was probably going about his day, having no idea that the letter he'd sent had just arrived. Having no idea that at this very moment a young woman in Hawaii was sitting on her couch, crying tears of joy, clutching a piece of paper that represented not just money, but belief. Belief that she was worthy. Belief that her dreams mattered. Belief that sometimes when you least expect it, the world sends you exactly what you need in the form of a kind stranger who stops when he doesn't have to. Leilani picked up the letter one more time and read the final lines again. Life has a funny way of bringing people together at exactly the right moment. She thought about the missed bus, the delayed flight, the computer error at the airport. All the things that had seemed like disasters at the time. All the things that had led her to exactly where she needed to be, to meet exactly who she needed to meet. Maybe Robert was right. Maybe there were no coincidences after all. Leilani stared at the computer screen in the bank's private office, her hands gripped tightly in her lap. The manager, a professional woman named Patricia with kind eyes and a patient smile, had just finished verifying the check. It had taken 20 minutes of phone calls and computer checks, and Leilani had spent every second of it convinced something would go wrong, that the check would bounce, that it was a mistake, that she'd wake up and find it had all been a dream. Well, Patricia said, turning her screen so Leilani could see, everything checks out. The funds are legitimate and the check will clear in 3 business days. Would you like to deposit it into your existing account, or would you prefer to open a separate savings account? The words hit Leilani like a wave. It was real. All of it was real. She started crying right there in the bank office, and Patricia quietly pushed a box of tissues across the desk without comment. Like young women crying over unexpected money was something she saw every day. I'm sorry, Leilani managed, wiping her eyes. I can't believe this is happening. It's quite a generous gift, Patricia said gently. If you don't mind me saying, this is the kind of money that could really change your life. Have you thought about what you want to do with it? Leilani nodded. She'd thought of little else since opening Robert's letter. I want to go back to school, to become a teacher. And I want to make sure my brother and sister are taken care of, that they don't have to worry so much. Patricia smiled. That sounds like a wonderful plan. Let me help you set up 2 accounts, one for education expenses and one for general savings. We can also talk about some basic investment options if you're interested. Money like this managed well can go even further. They spent the next hour going through paperwork and options. Patricia explained things in plain language, never talking down to her, treating her like an adult making important decisions about her future. By the time Leilani left the bank, she had a plan. A real concrete plan for the first time in 3 years. That evening, after dinner, she sat Daniel and Keiko down in their tiny living room. They looked worried. Serious family meetings usually meant bad news. Bills they couldn't pay. Problems at school. Another shift Leilani had to pick up that meant less time together. So, Daniel started nervously. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong, Leilani said, and she couldn't help smiling. Actually, something really amazing happened. Remember when I told you about the man who helped me get to Grandma Rose's funeral? Robert from Texas? Keiko nodded. The one who gave you a ride and bought you a new ticket when yours got canceled? Yeah, him. Well, he sent me a letter and... Leilani took a deep breath. And he sent me money. A lot of money. $50,000. The silence that followed was so complete that Leilani could hear the neighbor's TV through the thin walls. Daniel and Keiko just stared at her, mouths open, like she'd announced she was actually a secret princess or something equally impossible. 50,000, Daniel finally said. As in 50000? Yes. Dollars? Keiko added, still looking stunned. Yes, but why? Daniel asked, his programmer's brain probably trying to debug this illogical situation. Why would a stranger just give you that much money? So Leilani explained. She told them about Robert's story, about the stranger who'd helped him 30 years ago, about how he'd been looking for a way to pay that kindness forward. She told them about the letter, about the one condition, that someday she'd help someone else. He wants me to go back to school, Leilani said, her voice catching. He believes I can become a teacher, and I want to do it. I want to try. Keiko launched herself across the couch and wrapped her arms around Leilani. You should. You'd be the best teacher ever. Daniel was quieter, more thoughtful. What about us? He asked. And your jobs? How's it going to work? It was such a Daniel question. Practical, thinking through the logistics. Leilani loved him for it. I've been thinking about that, she said. I'll keep working part-time, but maybe just 2 jobs instead of 3. I'll go to school part-time too. Take evening and weekend classes. It'll take longer than if I went full-time, but we'll still have enough to live on. And if things get tight, we have some savings now as a cushion. Over the next few weeks, Leilani threw herself into planning. She met with an advisor at the University of Hawaii, mapping out what classes she needed, what credits from her community college days would transfer. She'd have to retake a few things, but she could complete her bachelor's degree in education in about 3 years if she took classes year-round. She quit her early morning shift at the hotel, which was the hardest physically and paid the least. The hotel manager was disappointed but understanding. You're doing something good for yourself, he told her. Don't feel bad about that. She kept her afternoon cafe job and the evening restaurant shifts, which still meant long days, but at least gave her mornings free for classes. The first day back in a college classroom felt surreal. Leilani sat in fundamentals of education, surrounded by students who were mostly younger than her, who probably didn't work 3 jobs or take care of siblings or know what it felt like to choose between groceries and electricity. But she also had something they might not, a bone-deep appreciation for the opportunity. She took notes like her life depended on it because in a way it did. Every week she emailed Robert. At first the emails were formal, almost like reports. Dear Robert, I enrolled in school. Thank you again for making this possible. But gradually, as Robert responded with warmth and genuine interest, the emails became more personal. She told him about her classes, about the professor who reminded her why she wanted to teach, about the study group she'd joined with 3 other non-traditional students who all had jobs and families. Robert wrote back with advice and encouragement. He asked questions about her studies, shared stories from his own life, sent articles he thought she'd find interesting. When she struggled with a particularly difficult statistics class, he connected her with a tutor through a program his company sponsored. When she felt overwhelmed and exhausted, he sent emails that were exactly what she needed to hear. Leilani. One email read, I know you're tired. I know some days it feels impossible to keep going. But I want you to remember something. You're not just doing this for yourself. Every time you walk into that classroom, you're showing Daniel and Keiko that dreams are worth fighting for. You're proving that circumstances don't have to define your future. That's worth more than any degree. Daniel and Keiko changed too. Watching their sister pursue her dreams seemed to light something in them. Daniel applied himself to his coding with renewed focus, entering competitions and eventually landing a part-time internship with a local tech startup.